I'm not sure I can express exactly how excited I am about this next step of the build of our grandfather's 1989 OBS extended cab C1500. This is the Stage 4 16-inch big brake kit from Little Shop Manufacturing, and those guys do it right. First of all, their website is absolutely phenomenal about asking you the right questions for you to make your selections. There's no second guessing or questioning if you're doing what you need or getting the parts that you need. They're very clear about it. Like, you can tell these guys have put their stuff together very much on purpose. Also, it's a good time to point out this video is not a substitute for the instructions that they have on their website, which is very clear in a PDF format, has images and good descriptions, kind of foolproof, to be honest with you. But hey, welcome to the video anyway. One of the options that we chose was the light gold anodizing, which kind of matches the paint here. You see, these are their brackets that they make in-house. They send you the bolts, washers, shims. These are the shims for these studs that are in here for the caliper distance. Again, the 16-inch rotors, they are directional, so you'll want to find the arrow to determine which size. This is their in-house hats. They send the hardware for these and plenty of the 271 Loctite, which, by the way, for those of you who may not know, when you break the end off, you can turn it over and snap it back on like that for storage and use this later. One of these will last you quite a while. Hubs that we're using are the standard bolt pattern 5-on-5. They are absolutely beautiful. I hate that you're never going to really see them. They did a great job on these. They sent us the inner and outer bearings. This is the dust cap. It's O-ringed. It's the most satisfying part about this install. We'll show you that later. They send you the oil seal, which is really a grease seal. Oil seals tend to be double lip with a spring, and grease seals seem to be just single lip. Just the more you know. Also, this is something that we needed to have, and I want to bring up. The kit that we ordered is for these Wilwood Iron Pro spindles. What you have to know is, and thankful to Little Shop, their website will explain, your factory castle nut and washer will not fit on the Iron Pro spindles. This is the brake pad set for their large 6-piston calipers, and these are the stainless brake lines and the adapters that will thread into the back of the caliper, and then they have this elbow fitting to go onto those. So they send you everything they need. Just make sure you select the right boxes. If you're reusing your stock spindles, or if you're like me, you've put aftermarket ones in there, just watch the video in the link below on the episode before this one where we removed that stuff before you can start this process. There's a pretty good chance if you're running 16-inch brakes, it's because you've got a pretty fancy build. You know you're gonna have to run big wheels, which 20 inches or larger is gonna be required with these to clear these massive calipers. And our truck's not gonna be auto-crossing. I mean, these are bigger than most Ferraris and Lambos and all other supercars. So someone's probably gonna ask, why do you need 16-inch brakes? The answer is pretty simple. They don't make a 17-inch brake. The instructions are gonna want you to start out by greasing these bearings and putting this on your spindles. But what I'll recommend before you get too excited about greasing things up, drop a bearing in here and grab your other bearing too. See if we can do this one-handed. And do a little test fit. You do not want to find out that there are any issues, or, I mean, these are humans. Maybe they sent the wrong bearing or seal or something. I'd rather find that out before everything's full of grease. You can tell that it rides really well on that inner bearing. Outer bearing on here. Oh yeah. Just for good measure, we'll take that seal out of the package, make sure it looks like it's gonna press in there nice and easy, and it appears that it's going to. Also, make sure that it is sized correctly for our spindle, where it's firm, but easily installed and removed. You know, I've learned the internet can get pretty harsh when it comes to instructing how to grease bearings. They do make bearing greasing little tubs that you drop your bearing in and force a bunch of pressure, and it squeezes the grease all through this bearing, and that's fine. If you want to spend the money on that thing, I think it works great if you're doing this often. Yeah, you should absolutely have something like that. I'm just gonna show you how to do it by hand and give you my theory behind that. But first you wanna inspect all your stuff. Make sure there's no debris or shavings or anything weird that may have ended up being in there. I trust the little shop guys to do a good job, but hey, everybody's human. Check the races that they've already pre-pressed in. You don't feel anything that's you would think is gonna create excessive wear or damage to the bearings. And go ahead and put a little grease in there, you know. Over greasing is not really a thing unless you had like bearing buddies or you just kept pumping grease into something. So for the bearings, let me grab some of this. My grandfather worked for John Deere for 40 something years, so I feel like it's only right to use a grease that they recommend. It is high pressure, high temperature. It's perfect for this application. I'll get a little bit more. And if you're just trying to make a mess in this bearing, you can hold the middle and spin the outer to make sure it gets movement. And if you think about it, every surface of this bearing inside and out has grease on it. So whether you put it in there with pressure or whether you wiped it on there, it's greased and that's done. So please don't get too caught up in the fact that that's not enough grease in a bearing. You can't put more grease in a bearing than this. So you'll drop this one in and then you'll have to deal with your oil seal. I do recommend removing any excess oil or grease from this surface because it's gonna spin and sling that grease. And you know what it's gonna sling it on? Your brakes. Greasy brakes probably don't work as well as dry brakes, just a shot in the dark. Block of wood, lay it over there, and then a soft mallet. No need to overthink it. You give this same treatment to the small bearing. Also, take some grease and wipe it on that spindle where this is gonna mount. Make sure and get some up against where that inner bearing is gonna make contact, and just a light film on where the seal is gonna live. That's gonna help it go in easier, and it's gonna keep it pliable, so hopefully it'll do a good job for a long period of time. Like, all it's there to do is keep excessive grease from coming out. It's not holding liquid in or anything like that. That sucker is greased. So, move on to the next step. You wanna make sure that you don't get super aggressive here so you don't damage this seal. Just rotate it. There, you'll know it. It'll slide right up there nice and easy. And then we'll install this front bearing. There we go. And slide our washer on there. And tightening this castle nut can create some debate also about how much preload. It's not like something you necessarily want to use a torque wrench on. It's kind of a feel situation. So you run it up by hand until it stops. You're moving your hub. You can kind of tell that's as far as I can go by hand. And for me, all you need to do is rotate this castle nut to the next opening that you can put your cotter pin in there. There we go. Now we have our O-ringed cap, which is my favorite part. Comes with a cotter pin also, so bonus. And you'll notice it's keyed. It's got this little lump here that's machined out in the hub. So line that up. Done. I probably should have pointed it out, but I'm sure you've noticed by now, this is a non-ABS application, so we don't have to worry about that connector or that ring that goes on the hub to measure a rotation of the front wheel. So the radial bracket, we're going to install that now. You put the gold washers against the head of the bolt. You're going to run them through here. Then go ahead and start with 2 shims on each one of these, which is going to get you somewhere close to what they expect you to have once you've installed your rotor. Now these are, take a 15/16 wrench or socket I'm just gonna snug them so it's gonna hold it tight enough against the shims that we know that's gonna be our distance, but not so tight that we're gonna take too much effort to remove it. On these bridge bolts, they come with these lock nuts and these washers. You're gonna remove those, and similar to what we did on the radial bracket bolts, we're gonna put 2 shims that'll essentially be the inside of our caliper mounting first, and now we can put our rotor together. Now be sure and follow the instructions. You want to set the rotor hat face down, and then set the rotor over it where the bolt holes are making contact at the shallowest point, I guess. Anyway, you can see it here in the video. And then put the 271 Loctite that they ship with it on each one of the bolts, run them in by hand. I zipped them down with a little 1/4-inch impact with no real torque. Then went over it with a torque wrench and tightened them all to 25 foot-pounds. Slide this bad boy over there. It is not light. And then grab a couple of open-ended lug nuts, because most of your fancy chrome apron style probably are too shallow. I'm just gonna run this up until it just makes contact to hold that in place so we can start test fitting our caliper. All right, so we've got those 2 shims on these bridge bolts already. Let's slide our caliper on. And then, it actually looks pretty center. We've got the 2 gold washers, which are not shims, that need to go on. You're gonna need a 12-point, a 13mm socket. It's gonna need to be shallow, or a thin-walled, I guess, is probably the best explanation. It can be the deep well socket, but it does need to be really thin, or it won't go in these calipers where they have the hole relieved for them. Make sure you get those started on there square. And then I'm just gonna run them in there snug. Certainly not tight or torqued. I'm gonna remove our little caliper keeper here. 1/4-inch, it's a 1/4-inch Allen. Make sure there's no nasty junk in there that you're gonna mess your rotors up. And that one doesn't want to start in there, which makes me think we're probably gonna have to do some shimming. Yeah, you can see this one falls right into place. See if I can put some light behind it, make it easier to see from where you are. Before we just go tearing it apart and add shims on these radial bracket bolts to move everything this direction, we might as well see if we can get these in here all the way and check our depth. Could probably go in. I think I will remove one of the shims on these bolts to move the caliper further towards the center. And then let's add a shim to the radial bracket to move the entire caliper in towards the center of the vehicle. It actually looks really good. Looks like we've got the same spacing on the inside of this one and the inside of here. I also like the depth here. You can see there's a little bit of taper, and this caliper, this brake pad facing is right on the top edge of that taper, and the spacing looks very good left to right. So I think we're good there. So what we're gonna have to do is take these nuts back off, put some of the thread locker on them, and tighten them to 25 foot-pounds. Now we verified that's good. Before we call it quits, we're gonna give that a spin, make sure there's no sound whatsoever, so it's not making any contact anywhere, which is good. And there's no magic torque number on these bolts. All this essentially does is keep the pads from coming out. So you want it to be snug, but not overly tight to where it tries to collapse the back side of this caliper and create kind of a bind on the brake pads. It's just snug. There we go. Kind of sneak up on it. There we go. Our last stop is running our brake lines, which, as we mentioned earlier, you've got to put these adapters into the back of your calipers, and then these will thread on to basically what looks like a -4 AN fitting. They recommend the Loctite 541 or 545. Anyway, that's basically a thread sealant, essentially a thread lubricant. Most people are very against using like a PTFE tape on these type of threads, even if you make sure and do not put it in a place where it could interfere or come in contact with the brake fluid itself. Thread that in, and I would always recommend test threading those in before you go to putting your thread sealant. 7/16 wrench, and you can over tighten this stuff, so be careful. I don't think there's an actual torque spec that you want. I always just say if you're not using both hands and a super long wrench, you'll know. And you can always snug these up later if you notice a brake line or brake fluid leaking. When that's on there, you can thread your brake line in here. Thread on your brake line, and it will use a 1/2" wrench to snug that up. And these certainly don't need to be overly tight. This type of fitting, by its nature, does a great job of sealing without over tightening it. To tie that brake line in to your factory hard lines, it's always good to put a little penetrating lubricant if you can ahead of time and let that sort of soak. Especially some of these vehicles, they're pretty old. And then you're going to want to remove that clip. These are 11 millimeter, aka 7/16. And then hopefully this has had some time to soak. It's 5/8 and 9/16. Be ready with our new brake line. We've let ours drain for quite a while now. And Little Shop is nice enough to give us new clips. I'm going to tap that in with a specialty hammer. Shout out to those who know what that is. Moved up to 11/16. See how it moves. Not gonna have any issues with that. So they gave us the right length hose, which is really nice to tie that in. So your last step is gonna be bleeding your brakes. So you're gonna follow the instructions on their website. We can't do that right now because we still have the rear brakes to do, which is in our next video. And then we're gonna also upgrade by replacing this master cylinder with one from Little Shop that fits one of the newer Chevy trucks. So they highly recommend that for running these larger brakes. So we're gonna do what they recommend. Because these things are absolutely massive, you're really gonna have to pay close attention to the clearance on your wheels, and you're gonna look at the instructions to see what Little Shop recommends. You need to drive them a little bit too, in case heat affects it, I guess. Because that is a pretty tight fit. It may require some shims back there. These are the weld bell knots. And they're designed from weld to fit some of the larger brake systems. But this sucker is right on the verge, if you ask me. It's got a little more room on the lower portion. But as you can see up here, it is pretty snuggly. But I don't think we're gonna have any issues with making contact. I hope this video has been super helpful. Also, try Grease Monkey TV as a promo code for Little Shop Manufacturing. Might get a few % off, and every little bit helps, if you know what I'm saying. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we do the rear drum to 16-inch disc brake conversion.